Welcome to Authenticity Unleashed. I'm your host, Pam Rader, and I have a wonderful guest here with me today, Dr. Nancy Crowell. And Nancy is a specialist in dealing with the nervous system, all things healing. And I love this because I think that the biggest thing that keeps us from being authentic and living our most authentic, aligned lives are the places that we're yet unhealed. So welcome to the show. I'm so grateful to have you here today. Nancy resides in Colorado, so she is in the middle of fall and almost winter, the same as us. And for those of you watching, you'll notice we look like twins today. So
we did not plan that.
No, definitely not. Welcome, Nancy. It's a pleasure to have you here. I would love to ask you a little bit about your journey into becoming a doctor, and then what made you want to specialize in this modality?
Yeah, I think I have a similar story to a lot of practitioners, at least in the online industry, where there's a wounded healer journey. I was a child of the 80s. My mom was a nurse, so I had a lot of antibiotic use as a child, was put on the birth control pill at the age of 14. And then in my early 20s, kind of woke up to the fact of, hey, I'm a naturalist, I don't want to put this in my body. And so I went off the birth control pill and was faced with severe cystic acne. And that, my vanity really started to fuel my health journey. So I was on a mission to figure out what was really causing this acne. So I had tried all of the dermatology, and they'd put me on prescription meds and all of that. None of that seemed to work. So then I started, doing cleanses and fasts, and went to Ayurvedic doctors, and all of this in my early 20s. And some of it helped and some of it didn't help. And so that eventually led me to start to study Chinese medicine. And that I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine. And I had huge leaps and bounds because I had acne, but I also had a lot of other symptoms that I was not especially concerned with because no one else could see them. So I had gas and bloating and anxiety and a bunch of other things, but I was much more fueled by my insecurity at the time. So a lot of that improved when I started to study Chinese medicine, but then I had a child. And when my son was born, all of the things that were helping me up until that point just were not were not as effective. So I then really had to pivot. I went to every natural healer in the area. So I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico at the time. And every natural healer that I went to was like, oh, you're just deficient. You just need to take herbs. And I just hit a wall. Like nothing was making me better. So I went into like a holding pattern for about 2 years. And after about 2 years, I decided that I just couldn't live that way anymore. And so I decided to start to study functional medicine. So I started to heal my gut. I started to look into hormones, into autoimmunity. And that's kind of what led me to where I am now. And along that journey, what I really found out to be true is that the body really needs to feel safe in order to heal. And so what that looks like is we could feel unsafe on a physiological level from mold exposure or high toxic load, or we could feel unsafe from a dysregulated nervous system from past trauma, or for most people, it's a combination of the two.
That's so fascinating. And I love that I love that you found your way to Chinese medicine. I think traditional Chinese medicine is incredible. I also believe that it's never one modality that heals us all. The more we learn about everything, the better we are. And it sounds like you explored a lot, and I'm sure you've brought a lot of your learning forward in what you do now. But what I love that you just said is that the body has to heal in safety. And there's something about that I want to explore, because you said you're a child of the 80s. I'm older than you. I'm a child of the 70s. I was the least supervised generation of all time. Like completely no. My parents didn't know where I was from 1980 to 1989, and they'll tell you they did, but they didn't. And we had, I mean, when I was growing up, we had serial killers roaming the streets. Clifford Olson and Ted Bundy was around, and like all of that stuff. Like we grew up in that culture of fear, but no one talked about it. And then we kind of like had to tough it out, right? Just be tough. And I had some trauma, as many people did in my first marriage, etc. But I never looked at it as a nervous system problem. I looked at it as you're either tough or you're weak.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. Like it was just kind of had the message we got from society. And it took me years of like yoga, meditation, self-study, leadership, personal development, all kinds of things to really get to, holy cow, my nervous system is very dysregulated. And I have some beliefs that I need to challenge about that. But even when I discovered that, no one was talking about the nervous system at the time. Everybody thought when we talked about it, like, that's weird. And only now in the past, I would say 3 years, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel it's been about 3 years that it's kind of an open conversation and people are recognizing that a myriad of health disorders, the actual symptoms that present are just actually the result of a dysregulated nervous system. And when we get the nervous system regulated, those things can heal. So I don't know much more about it than that. I want to turn it over to you and let you speak to why that is.
I think a lot of us, I mean, I definitely got a little bit, even though I am younger than you, a little toughen up princess type of parenting as well. And what's interesting is you have kids too, but it, I try to do it different like most parents do, but it's interesting to see that come up in me sometimes when my son is voicing emotions and I'm like, well, he just needs to toughen up, right? Like the thought comes into my mind and I'm like, well, I'm not going to do that, right? So that there's a new strategy. So I think a lot of people have had that parenting, and just like you, although I did actually have, when I voice out loud the experiences I had in early childhood and even through adolescence to another person, they're like, whoa, but I never believed I had trauma. Right? I never believed I had trauma. And there's a lot of people that still don't think that because they identify it as, well, I wasn't raped. I was never hit. I was not a war victim, right? They look at these major, what they call big T traumas, they don't self-identify as, and really what they're redefining trauma now as, those are obviously traumas, but for the mass are basically incidences where the person was not supported in integrating the experience.
Right.
Children
will naturally do whatever they can to win love and avoid punishment.
Right.
So if a parent disregards their feelings, they go, it's unsafe for me to express that feeling, and they stuff it down. And is that what dysregulates the nervous system?
Well, yeah, because if you think about, we hear a lot, especially post-COVID or during, I think it was during COVID where a lot of that was happening, but around generational trauma. I think that really blew up a lot of conversations around this. And if we think about what is generational trauma, it really is the passing down of a dysregulated nervous system, because we get our nervous system, like we get it in utero and with our primary care in those first years of life. So there we do, there's something called co-regulation. So a baby cannot regulate its own nervous system. And so it co-regulates with its primary care. So whatever that nervous system state is of that person is imprinted as like the baseline and the norm to that little person. And so say like we have an anxious mom, let's say we had a mom who was never taught what a regulated nervous system was, which most of our parents were not. Maybe she was really stressed because she was also working a job and taking care of a baby and managing the house. And now she's taking care of this little baby and she, is disassociating, or all of these different patterns. That baby is now taking that on, and now that's passed down, right? And it's not until we wake up and have our own hero's journey and heal that we kind of come come into full completion. But that's how that's passed down through generations. And that's why it's really important as a parent, if you're able to break those cycles so that you can pass down a more regulated nervous system state to your child. In Chinese medicine, we say to heal the child, heal the mother. And a lot of that is because of when the parent is in a regulated state, the child will mirror that state.
You know, that's so fascinating because I don't know if you know anything about me, but I have a son who was in fentanyl addiction for almost 15 years. When I was pregnant with my son, I was married to his father, who was bipolar and alcoholic and was physically and emotionally abusive to me. And I had to actually escape, like being held hostage while my son was 1. So the first year of his life was atrocious, and he would have been imprinted like that. And back then, I mean, he's 31 now. Back then, when I took him to counselors and doctors, I said, my son has been traumatized. And they said, he's too young. He's not going to remember any of that. But I knew as a mother, like that was a thing. And then when he started to dabble in addiction, everyone said, oh yeah, because it's genetic. And I was like, no, because then everybody whose dad was an alcoholic would get, it's not that. I knew that there was something environmental, but there was no proof and there was no talk about it. And what you just explains why I have 3 other children that grew up in, like my son was out of that environment when he was 1, and then they all grew up together. 3 of them are okay, and 1 of them really struggled because he had a different imprinting on his nervous system when he was a baby.
Yeah. And we're always looking to source safety. So I had a set portion of my life. My father was a drug addict and alcoholic. And so that's part of some of the traumatic experiences I had in early life. And so when I hit the age of 14, from 14 to 24, I did a lot of experimentation with different drugs and alcohol. And when I think back on why, well, I was numbing out. Why was I numbing out? Because I didn't have the tools and the knowledge of how to process the emotions and the anxiety and the overwhelm that I was feeling. So my best way of managing that was to numb myself. And if you think about a lot of addicts, that's at the root of it, is an emotion that they cannot hold. And when we're looking at nervous system resilience, that's what we're really wanting. So we're not wanting to avoid stress. We're not wanting to avoid bad feelings or negative emotions. Especially a lot of my clients, they're entrepreneurs, they're leaders. Like, they actually need to be able to hold and manage stress and the emotions of a lot of other people. So what we want to do is actually have increased capacity to hold those emotions. And in order to create that nervous system resilience, we have to be able to be with the emotions more. And if, like me, what I realized in my life is I had narrowed my experience. So I had started to control things to avoid. And I think sometimes we do this even with modalities like, yoga, meditation, breath work. I mean, all of these are amazing tools. And sometimes we use it to control our experience rather than widen our experience.
100%. Like anything, the medicine can be the poison, right?
Right. It could
all
be
in the dose and the intention.
All of these things that have positive influences sometimes, or even the techniques I teach my clients in order to regulate their nervous system, they could be used as an avoidance strategy, right? Yeah. Rather than the whole purpose is to increase the tolerance that we have to literally be in the discomfort of that emotion and to know that we are safe within that. Like we are now grown adults, we can now hold that. And so there's it's a very slow process in order to create that inner safety. It's not like we go from 1 to 180 overnight.
Well, it's like it's rewiring. The nervous system is wired to protect the meat suit to survive, right? It's not really that interested in us thriving. It's just more interested in survival. And so the brain only has the past to look at. So if something looks similar and it seems dangerous, it will go into the archives and pull out the old response,
right,
to try to keep us safe. But I love what you're saying, about nervous system resilience, because I have always said that really what I believe we're meant to do here on our time on earth is to continue to expand our capacity for discomfort.
Yes.
Just keep expanding our capacity for discomfort. Now, that doesn't mean toughing things out. That doesn't mean shoving things down. That means holding it, experiencing the wholeness of all the emotions that will come our way, the joy, the pain, the good, the suffering, all of it, and being able to hold it and know that this too shall pass. Is that kind of the essence of it?
Yeah. And I want to add, there's some of us in the world that are masochists.
Yeah.
We have a little bit of a kink there. And so we actually might need to lean towards the pleasure and the joy, and that will be equally uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The tolerance for the good. Yeah. So just like knowing where you lie, because if you've had a lot of discomfort and if you've learned to push through a lot in early life, like if you just had kind of a rough time, you're probably really good at the tough times.
Mm-hmm.
And those of us that had that experience, when all of a sudden you're met with an easy relationship, financial abundance, things coming, just like things coming with ease and joy and pleasure, you can easily self-sabotage that unconsciously because it's such an uncomfortable thing. And this is where we hear people talk about glass ceilings. And it has to do with our nervous system. Glass ceilings are really created by our nervous system tolerance. So we all have a window of tolerance of how bad we're used to it getting and how good we're used to it getting. And when something goes either beyond it, below, or above it, then all of a sudden it's a stress to the system, and that's where we become dysregulated. And a lot of people don't think about the stress of actually things improving and the stress of things getting better. And that's something to look at as well.
So this is interesting. How can people recognize what you described there? First off, to me, I think of that in terms of like the thermostat in your house. It's kind of set at 71 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever it is. And then if you try to turn it up, your nervous system goes, nope. Or you try to turn it down, and it wants to regulate. It wants to go to what's familiar, even if that's not healthy. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's why whether it's an addict or an abusive relationship or whatever, that's why we stay in a familiar hell rather than something new, because of our nervous system.
So what does a dysregulated nervous system present like in the average person? What are some symptoms of a dysregulated nervous system?
It does vary from person to person, but it could be, anxiety and overwhelm are often like ones, not being able to sit still, overworking, procrastination, doom scrolling, any sort of addictive behaviors to like buying things or eating foods, emotional eating. I said procrastination. It could just be also anytime a thought is not one of expansiveness. So if it's not one of possibility, if it's not one that's of problem solving, if it's kind of more an Eeyore or a Piglet voice, anything that's not more Winnie the Pooh, that would be a sign of a dysregulated nervous system. We can really look at our thoughts to know where we are in our nervous system, because the thoughts follow the nervous system state. So if we want to change our thought patterns, we need to regulate our nervous system first.
It's interesting. I had an Indigenous teacher share with me one time that there are only two kinds of thoughts: constructive or destructive. And that we actually need to start to, watch for our thoughts. And when we have destructive thoughts, that we need to check our environment, check what's really going on. So that's very interesting. I had never heard.
So it would be like the anything that's not constructive would be your cue. I'm dysregulated. And everyone has their own personal patterns of what that looks like. Some people go anxious, some people go more what they call dorsal vagal, or like a shutdown state or disassociation. We call it a home away from home. So when we were small children, we all had survival strategies of how to be loved and accepted by our family units. And so some of us learned to fight to get heard. Some of us learned to people please. Some of us learned to be hidden, right? And those patterns will typically continue and show up in adult life.
Right. Yeah, they just repeat themselves, like you said, the familiar. And I know that personally, and then I've done this work with many people in my realm as well. And just coming at it from a little bit of a different angle, being like a coach. But I know is that even when we know better, it's hard to do better. The nervous system's pull is strong.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's really important for people to have support, like someone like yourself, having ongoing guidance, because healing your nervous system by yourself, I mean, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but boy, you sure would make it hard.
Yeah. Well, it's important to have a healthy person to co-regulate your nervous system too, because sometimes your spouse or your family may not be the healthy nervous system you want to regulate to. The other thing, the reason why I blend functional medicine with the nervous system is because we also can't out-regulate a imbalanced blood sugar, right? We can't out-regulate a toxic environment, like from an environmental toxic standpoint. It's hard to regulate a nervous system with disrupted hormones. I mean, there's physical aspects that need to be addressed as well. Like they feed into each other, right? So the nervous system can cause some of those physiological problems, and the physical can also perpetuate the nervous system. So if someone is doing a lot of therapy or somatics and working with a coach and investing all of this into themselves and still not seeing any improvements, I'd say, okay, you need to look at what's happening physically. Like what is going on in your body? Have you run functional labs? What are you eating? What's your toxic load? What are your hormones?
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, we are whole human beings. We can't just look at the old Newtonian model of, just, well, if your leg hurts, it's your leg. We have to look at people as a spiritual beings, part of a community. What do we eat? All of that. I love that. And I love that medicine. Do you see a movement that this is becoming more, well, maybe I shouldn't say more, becoming less fringe and more accepted and more talked about, like functional medicine and even naturopathic medicine using bioidentical hormones, all these kinds of things. It's being more talked about now and less sort of shooed to the side. Would you say that's true?
It's hard for me to say because I think, well, yes, and I think it is becoming less fringe because I actually have a friend that's pushing to get functional medicine like in the NHS and in the UK and stuff like that. So I think there are government organizations that are becoming more open and it's becoming a little bit more accessible. Though I will say that version of it may still be a little bit diluted than if you're going to someone that's an expert in a particular field, but it's still better than just them telling you, here's an antibiotic, see you later.
Right.
And the only reason I'm saying I'm not 100% sure, because I'm pretty sure that when I'm looking through my social media and I'm seeing all this stuff, it's very curated to me. You know what I'm saying? So like, it's hard for me to, it's like kind of hard for me to have a complete finger on the pulse, because I was out with some people last year and the woman was like, yeah, I would never pay $500 to see a functional medicine doctor. I'd rather buy a new pair of Prada shoes. And I do think that that's still very much like the mentality around health in a lot of individuals. Like, they don't want to invest that money. They only want what their insurance is going to cover. And if they're not going to cover the more advanced labs and the kind of more root cause medicine, they may not be going down that path. So I don't know where, in a bell curve where that mass lies, but I do think it's becoming a little bit more normal than say 20 or 30 years ago to consider it.
Yeah, I find that really interesting too. I've been a person who's always invested in myself, in my health, in my wellness, in my coaching, all of that kind of stuff. I've invested and seen the great value, great return on those investments. But I run into it all the time. Even if I'm referring a client who's invested great deal working with me and I say, I think that you should see someone in functional medicine or you should do, and they will argue for that because it's not you said it at the very beginning. We're more concerned about our vanity sometimes than we are about our real health. And that speaks to me to a much deeper sickness in our society.
Well, if I buy a new pair of Prada shoes, everyone can see, right, that. And it changes everyone's perspective of me. But if I spend $500 and improve my hormones or whatever, my gut health, no one sees that. And so it's an interesting thing to think about, because we're in a society where people value more what others are thinking of them than how they actually feel.
And I think this is the deeper sickness. We spend most of our lives managing other people's perception of our status. And if there was one thing that we could do to start to regulate our nervous system, it would be to, in the spiritual teachings that I use, we say, give up what you must, bring into view the fixed like positions that you have and habits, and then let go of the ones that don't serve you. And managing other people's perceptions of you is a losing game. And I think that it's almost a hysterical game because everyone's playing it and no one really cares about what anyone else is doing because they're so busy managing the perception of themselves.
We're all being narcissistic.
And therefore we have all of these dysregulated nervous systems walking around regulating or like co-regulating with each other and creating more of that.
I mean, the last 3 years or 4 years, I guess, is a perfect example of that. Just the mass hysteria, like how everyone can feed off of each other. And I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying around safety is the most important thing. If we could learn one thing in our lifetime, it's how to source inner safety, because our environment is not going to provide that for us. The more we go into the future, the more technological our environment becomes, the more separate we become from nature and that process. You know what I'm saying? Like the more, I just think there's going to be a lot more mental health disorders, the more we move into the technological era, because people's nervous systems are not going to be able to handle the speed at which things are moving. And so if they are not learning the tools to regulate their nervous systems and to bring that sense of safety from within, we're going to see a lot more, unfortunately, I think, like suicides, anxiety, depression, just all of those things, because it's not natural. We still have the nervous system state of our forefathers and even more primitive beings. Like we're just not designed for it. So it's actually very imperative for our general well-being to not look to our environment for safety and be able to find that within ourselves.
That's so incredible that you relate that to technology. I'm not a terribly anxious person at all. And you and I are in a similar, we're in a program together, and the technological aspect has really been stretching my nervous system, and I can feel it. And I felt a lot of anxiety over the past few, and I'm aware enough to know what that is and sit in it and expand my capacity for discomfort. But I have all these tools and I'm super aware, and I still was feeling intense, anxious feelings about it. I can't imagine what it's like for someone who has no awareness that that's what's happening to them.
They're binge eating, they're drinking, they're smoking pot. I mean, they're finding their personal tools the best that they can to self-soothe their nervous system. Sugar brings down cortisol levels, so it's like everything that anybody's doing, we don't need to feel shame for it. There's no judgment. It all makes sense. And we can find ways that are more supportive and align with what we're wanting to create.
So what's available to people? Because I know we're humans and we only do stuff if it's like we want to know what's in it for us, right? Like we're kind of selfish creatures. What's in it for people to regulate their nervous system? What's on the other side of a regulated nervous system?
Well, first say that a regulated nervous system is anti-inflammatory in nature.
Whoa.
Yeah. So once you go into sympathetic, which is the fight or flight or kind of anxiety overwhelm state, that is actually inflammatory in nature. So
So do you
also
think people who have like autoimmune diseases, there's a direct
100%.
relationship to trauma?
Yeah. Yeah. They have
Okay.
like a whole testing. I forget what it's called right now. Childhood. I don't know. It's a quiz. It's like
The
10.
childhood adverse
Yes,
experience.
that one.
Yeah.
So they've linked that with autoimmune conditions.
Yeah,
So
Gabor Mate's work links that. I was just curious what your
yeah,
thoughts
so
were.
there
Yeah.
is that. Well, yes, because and you'll see a lot of people that are doing all the right things in terms of a protocol, but aren't getting better, and that's from that dysregulated nervous system state. So a bunch of physiological functions, like our GI motility slows down, right? And once that slows down, that increases risks for dysbiosis and gut issues. Like
Mhm.
there's a cascade that happens. So when we're in the parasympathetic, and some people don't even know what that feels like because they haven't felt that way since maybe they were even a baby, right? They don't know how to be in that safe place, but in that parasympathetic state is where our body is functioning optimally. So if we look at every single chronic health issue, whether that's cancer, autoimmunity, heart disease, any of that, they all have major research associating it with stress. Okay, we all know this. Stress is bad. So what is stress? People are always like, yeah, I need to reduce my stress. The most obscure thing for them because they have no idea how to reduce stress. They kind of maybe think they need to take more bubble baths or they need to quit their job.
And so then some of the other side of healing your nervous system is better physical health.
Diseases that we associate with high stress,
Mm-hmm.
inflammation will be reduced. If we think about even productivity at work, we are more productive when we're in creative states. There's a lot of research around flow states. Flow states are blended like parasympathetic with sympathetic state. So if we're in a fight or flight or dorsal vagal state, we're not going to be as productive. Quality of relationships, sex drive, quality of sleep, releasing weight easily. I mean, there's literally nothing. You could list any symptom, whether that's a work symptom or a relationship symptom or a health symptom that is not directly impacted by your nervous system state.
Incredible. So one of the oldest systems, I mean, I imagine the nervous system evolved probably before a lot of our higher functions.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the oldest systems has to heal before we sort of get what we want. Now, you spoke a lot about health things, but as we were talking about earlier, people are driven by vanity. And you said you gave some vanity metrics in there. They could lose weight, be more attractive to other people, better sex life. Those are some good things for people.
Clearer skin, better complexion. I mean, even you could think about it would even be less wrinkles. I mean, a lot of our emotional states are held in our face. You see it with the 11s lines across here. We typically see like anger being held here, fear being held here. The fascia is really directly associated with the nervous system, so that's being seen in the face. Lymph flow is affected by the nervous system state, so puffiness, that sort of stuff. So when we're able to self-regulate, we're that happy, or not even happy, because I think happy is not a constant state, but we are in that, we're in a more neutral, grounded, able to contact happiness or joy or pleasure state. And the other states, they have a time and place. I don't think that we would never want to ever feel them. I think they're important, but most people just don't know how to relax or how to bring themselves back into safety.
Right. And, in the yoga teachings, they talk about that really we're the sum total of our reactions. And the place to be is in the middle where we can witness and we can choose. And it's not saying any emotion is bad or good, but we have access to choosing. Instead of it happening to us, we create it.
Right.
And so a regulated nervous system would allow us to create our experience with intention more often.
Yeah.
That
It
sounds
does.
attractive.
Yeah. Like your child is freaking out, instead of reacting and, the emotional reaction you might have, it allows you that spaciousness to be like, wow, I'm the adult. I'm the one I'm holding the energy of the room. In leadership, we hear often the saying of, we're always in a game of enrollment, right? I'm either enrolling someone or they're enrolling me, right? It's like, who's holding the power in the room? And if we think about what is that power, it is the nervous system state. The calmest person in the room has the power.
Whoa. Now that's something that people are interested in too, right?
Yeah.
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 Oh, that's amazing. So where can people find you and look into your work and how specifically could they work with you if that was something that they wanted to do?
Yeah, so my website is drnancykroll.com. There's some information about me, some of the programs that I offer. I'm also on Instagram, Dr. Nancy Kroll. I do have a podcast called the Disrupt the System podcast. On there's a lot of interviews with other functional medicine doctors and leaders on similar topics that we're sharing. And in terms of working with me, there's a few different ways to work with me, but right now I'm doing mostly one-on-one work. So they could reach out via my website or via Instagram, and we could discuss how to kind of go down that path.
Beautiful. And I really admire you. You're so vulnerable. I loved that you started out with, I was driven by vanity. I was like, oh, I like her right away because she just tells the truth. That's great. But your journey I'm a firm believer in when we walk the talk, when we have traveled the path, and it's our job to reach our hand back and help other people. And I really admire you for doing that, for showing up in the world to advocate for something that matters to you and to make that your life's work. I think that's so very important. And I love that you're out there talking about this, sharing this with the world, because as you said, I also believe that mental health is decreasing in our society, and we need more people like you to help the world in this next phase. So thank you for everything you do. Thank you for being here today. It was a pleasure chatting with you. And I know that listeners are really going to enjoy this. So if you like the show, please share the show. Share it with your friends. That's how it grows. And if you have any comments about the show, leave them in the show under the show notes. And I'll look forward to seeing y'all, talking to y'all next time.